Alright, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. It's me, Addy, again. And today I'm going to be doing another impressions video, this time on Ever Crisis, the latest project within Square Enix's beloved and incredibly successful Final Fantasy VII franchise, which released just yesterday. Now, for those of you who don't know, Final Fantasy VII is my favorite game ever made. So it should really come as no surprise that any sort of media within this vast compilation of games, books, movies, and more is going to be something that I'll inevitably check out. So therefore, Ever Crisis was never going to be an exception, despite the game at its core being something that I've historically always avoided due to a complete lack of interest in it, that being a mobile gacha experience. But like I said, this is an entry within my favorite video game continuity, where I'm down to check out everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of which have been covered at some point by the stories within the Final Fantasy VII franchise. So where does Ever Crisis fall on that spectrum? Well, that's what I'll be touching on in today's video, which will include opinions that are based on my first couple of hours playing the game last night on stream. Now, Ever Crisis is probably one of the most fascinating projects within the Final Fantasy VII series. When it was first unveiled back in 2021, Square Enix advertised it as a chibi-style retelling of not just the original Final Fantasy VII, but every single game and movie within its compilation, ranging all the way from Before Crisis to Dirge of Cerberus. And on top of that, they labeled this project with a tagline, "Another possibility for a remake." This pretty much made every single Final Fantasy VII fan more than excited. We had so much to look forward to. The possibility of playing the movie Advent Children as a game, getting the archaic flip phone game Before Crisis to be an actual game now, and for Dirge of Cerberus to potentially be good this time around, it all sounded amazing. This was also particularly good news for the folks who'd always wanted a remake that was more true to the style of the original Final Fantasy VII than the actual remake that we got, since Ever Crisis seemed to retain the classic elements of the original, such as a 2.5D atmosphere, dialogue boxes, and turn-based combat. All in all, it was just a blast getting to see that we were getting way more Final Fantasy VII content, and in a style that looked very pleasing. The only thing about all this that was strange was the fact that it was going to be a mobile game, leading to speculation that this would be some kind of free-to-play gacha-style game, which was pretty much confirmed both by Tetsuya Nomura and the various follow-up trailers leading to the game's launch day. This understandably turned a lot of fans away from the game, who were expecting something entirely different out of Ever Crisis. I myself was a little disheartened, considering that I'm not particularly a fan of these types of games, but I was still committed to trying the game out upon its release, and now that I've played it, pretty much everything that I expected is what I got from this game. But I'm also happy to say that there were a couple of surprises leaning towards the pleasant side of things that I got out of it as well. And this is one of the reasons why I said earlier that Ever Crisis is a fascinating game overall. On the one hand, it features overwhelming gacha mechanics that you could expect out of any mobile game from that category, where you're bombarded with a multitude of different menus, shops, mission types, daily events, season passes, login bonuses, loot box systems, and so much more, all of which can very quickly deter someone from playing further, which is pretty much what happened to me the last time I tried to play a mobile gacha game in the form of Dissidia Opera Omnia, which wasn't terrible, but at the same time didn't do much to ease the player's way into the experience, in my opinion, which I've come to realize very few of these games actually do. Within the gacha genre, the menus pretty much are the game, with emphasis being placed on spending your in-game currency, or more aptly, your IRL currency to buy in-game currency, to then draw random gear of varying rarity from some kind of loot box system for your characters, which will make all the difference during gameplay. And these games strongly encourage you to do so as soon as possible with the myriad of limited time deals and events that they push, leading to the opinion that these games are shallow and predatory with blatant pay-to-win gambling mechanics. And I can empathize with this viewpoint and went into this game with a similar mindset with very little actual interest in these aforementioned gacha aspects, all of which are present here in Ever Crisis as well. This game immediately bombs you with all the overwhelming menus and features of a gacha game, many of which you won't be interested in at all, including the loot box system, or draws as the game calls them. The only times I really interfaced with this stuff were during the tutorial segment or rare occasions where I had earned enough in-game currency through simply playing the game normally. The rest of the time, I wasn't interested at all in the game's gacha side, which mainly offers a wide range of character skins, weapons, and materia for our favorite band of FF7 characters. To me, it's just, none of it felt right for Final Fantasy VII, and it just felt weird seeing this gacha-fied, if you will, version of this franchise. I was really only here to experience this adorable chibi retelling of the Final Fantasy VII stories that was shown to us all the way back in 2021, regardless of how good or bad it would end up being. And given my initial impressions of the gacha stuff when I opened this game, which wasn't looking too hot, I didn't go in with the highest expectations for the story and combat. But while on the one hand the game does feature these shallow gacha mechanics, on the other it features a surprisingly decent and charming take on the stories of Final Fantasy VII that we know and love. Each saga of the compilation in this game is divvied up into a series of abridged missions, all of which do a pretty good job of retelling the original narratives, and each mission will include at least one of three things: combat scenarios, dialogue, and exploration, meaning that you'll have some missions where you'll do all three, and others where you'll only witness conversations between characters with no exploration or combat. It all depends on what the original game called for during that moment in the plot. I, of course, started this game off by playing the OG Final Fantasy VII Saga, since the game pretty much makes you do this, but I would have anyway. And I was very pleasantly surprised by how much of the original game's charm is retained here through things like the dialogue being significantly refined, yet capturing the tone of the original characters, the new chibi models having these adorable mannerisms and animations that accurately reflect the personalities of the Final Fantasy VII cast, and the neat way in which the story beats were abridged, yet retained both big and small moments that were crucial to the spirit of the original story. Heck, you can still get Cloud to make some of his adorable decisions from the OG game, such as choosing who to give Aerith's flower to, and more. The remixed music accompanying these scenes sound quite lovely as well. As you're going through each chibi remade level, you'll hear the same tracks that played in the original game in those same areas, except here they've been redone, and I liked them, and I think I'll honestly always like them no matter how many times they'll be remixed, since FF7's soundtrack is just that good. Man, even the rescored main menu prelude theme and overworld theme of Final Fantasy VII sound freaking glorious and nostalgic as well. And something that's really cool is how during combat, you'll mainly hear tracks from Final Fantasy VII Remake, while you're playing the Final Fantasy VII Saga, that is. So let's talk about the combat next, which complemented the story quite nicely in my opinion. So Ever Crisis retains the traditional turn-based combat system, but with an interesting twist where you get to partake in it as the beautiful 3D models from Final Fantasy VII Remake, which look astonishingly good here for a mobile game. So one second you'll be breezing through the world of Gaia as a chibified Cloud, but the next you'll run into a random encounter where you'll assume control of his 3D remake model, but in a classic turn-based scenario, which works in a pretty interesting way. In this rendition, your party will automatically attack the enemy, while your input as a player has to do with you using your character's traditional ATB gauges for special abilities, or their limit gauge to perform their classic ultimate attacks. Every aspect of this, from the stats to the abilities of your characters, can be influenced from the various menus, which again reward you for playing the slots, but I felt like I was able to get some pretty decent mileage before I ran into some of the tougher bosses and enemies who required me to enhance my party. Luckily though, you get a good amount of crafting ingredients as you play normally to make upgrades to your gear without having to interface too much with the gacha stuff, or at worst, paying with your wallet. There was an acceptable degree of challenge being posed here, and I also liked how these battles were interspersed throughout the story, particularly when I played a bit of the Crisis Core saga where I was witnessing brand new scenes and interactions between my favorite character Zack and some other fan favorites in chibi form. Having to inject its own battle scenarios between story beats we're already familiar with is something that Ever Crisis naturally had to do for certain sagas like Crisis Core, since without their unique gameplay modes such as Crisis Core's mission system that gives way for a lot of combat scenarios, there wouldn't be as many battles. And I feel like Ever Crisis does a pretty good job of this. It does a good job of introducing new scenes between characters that made sense for them and were charming, while creatively transitioning from these moments into battles. For example, at the start of the Crisis Core saga in this game, instead of Zack immediately being briefed about his Wutai assignment after the introductory Behemoth battle like in the original game, there are 4 to 5 new scenes that have him training further, all of which feature new interactions and battles, which was pretty dang cool to see, and makes me excited to see where the rest of Crisis Core saga goes in this game, given that there are a few new scenes being added here to the saga that spawn my love for the universe of Final Fantasy VII. All of these missions can be replayed in these sagas as well as regular replays with any party combination you want, regardless of whether or not those characters took part in the saga, or dungeon crawls where you can go back on these boss hunts to win extra in-game currency, which is also kind of cool. One other thing that I wanted to point out that I thought was pretty cute was how when you start a new saga in Ever Crisis, it plays the opening cinematic for that game, which looks amazing as always. And yeah, if you're curious, Final Fantasy VII's opening uses the remix version, and once 3D Cloud hops off the train, you segue right into the Chibi Land. Now, one thing that is interesting so far about all of this is that you can't play the entirety of one saga at a time. the game will only let you play up to a certain chapter before it makes you start a different saga and play that one up to a certain chapter in order to unlock the next couple parts of the previous saga you were playing. Which I kinda like in a weird way, since this encourages the player to diversify their experience through the compilation. So for example, in order to go past chapter 4 of Final Fantasy VII, you need to play the first couple chapters of Crisis Core, followed by doing the same thing for the First Soldier, which is a brand new saga in this game and in the compilation in general, which as I understand it, isn't fully complete yet. Since this is a live service game, what we have right now are just a few chapters of Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core, and First Soldier, with more chapters and sagas from the compilation being released at a later time down the line. And again, the First Soldier is a brand new saga that we have never seen before, made specifically for Ever Crisis, that details the story of a young Sephiroth, which I haven't fired up yet, but I'm very much so looking forward to, given not only the obvious fact that it's brand new story stuff that we've never seen before within the compilation of FF7, and that too for a majorly important character, but also the narrative quality so far of Ever Crisis, which has not disappointed me in the slightest. So all in all, ladies and gentlemen, I'll go circle back to answer the question at the beginning of this video, which is this: is Ever Crisis a good, bad, or ugly game? I would say that it's a little more nuanced than that, just like with anything, since while it does have its messy gacha exterior, beneath that crust is a genuinely charming and enjoyable game, which makes me want to say that it is an ugly game with a pretty personality. And it's one that you'll be likely to enjoy if you're a die-hard fan of Final Fantasy VII and just want to experience more story in its universe, but otherwise you're probably not going to get much out of this game, I won't lie. Still, doesn't hurt to give it a shot though, since it's completely free to play, and not the worst way in the world to experience the stories of the compilation if you look past all the gacha stuff, but it is what it is. And hey, from my point of view, I'm just glad we're living in a timeline right now where we're getting more Final Fantasy VII stuff in general. Anywho's folks, that's it for my impressions today. If you enjoyed the video, do be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you want to check out the rest of my live Ever Crisis playthrough and reactions, feel free to head over to twitch.tv/irritableindian and maybe even drop me a follow over there. That would mean a lot. But until the next one, stay happy, stay healthy, stay positive, and as always, keep on keeping on.